Hello and welcome to another edition of Media Watch. I'm your co-host, Eric Tait. With me is?
I'm your co-host, Bob Anthony. Good to see you again, Eric.
Always a pleasure, Bob. This is a production of EVT Educational Productions in association with the good graces of Manhattan Neighborhood Network. And so we must remember to credit M&N at the end of this program again.
Right. They do a lot for us.
Yes, they do. So, Bob, when we left off the last time, there were a couple of breaking international stories that we alerted our viewers to that we actually didn't need to because it was high in the news. We did talk about the Ukraine situation that could spin into a total civil war. We talked about the Venezuelan situation that could also spin into craziness. And of course, we mentioned the Syrian ongoing already civil war and how at least that Syrian situation and the Ukrainian situation impacted the U.S. foreign relations and their relationship to Russia. We couldn't have been more prescient about
I guess so.
relations with Russia, could we? Little did we know, and I kick myself for not predicting that things might have gotten even more serious as far as the Russians were concerned, but we can get back into that. So when you were coming in, we were talking about the latest developments in the Ukraine. Tell us a little bit about what was happening to that our U.S. diplomat in the Ukraine, because this is Wednesday when we're taping. By Monday, it might be totally changed.
It might be a whole different story. But as I left to do this taping, I was watching on CNN. I guess the U.S. envoy in Crimea was basically chased. We don't know by who, but he had to hide out in a cafe for a while, and he's since left the country. He was threatened by the local groups, which in that area are powerfully pro-Russian.
So these were not military troops or anything. These were just the population of Crimea, local citizenry.
Right.
Now, I've heard some reports that some of these local citizenry are really citizenry in quotation marks because they're basically trying to help give a what do we call it? AstroTurf groundswell movement to the Russian facade. About
we've seen this
coming
before.
in for humanitarian.
That's why I say we're not sure exactly who the populace was that rose up and chased down. I mean, they wouldn't really be singling out U.S. Citizens at this point because our presence there is fairly small. But this person, the envoy, was targeted, and he was in danger for a while. So he's since left the area as of this moment. It's
interesting because we can talk about the coverage of U.S. media's coverage of the Russian, because they're no longer Soviet Union, Russian humanitarian mission into Crimea, as President Putin puts it. I'm quoting President Putin now. He's there for humanitarian reasons, and our local, some of our local national press outlets, and of course our local pundits and whatever. The two things that caught my eye was actually not one, but a number of elected politicians from what we call the opposition party, the Republican pundits, and folks like Rudolph Giuliani and Lindsey Graham. And John McCain.
Yes, I listened to John McCain as I traveled
here.
I
missed McCain. I heard Graham and I heard Giuliani. What did McCain have to say? What's his latest?
Well, he basically piled on and questioned why we were not prepared to see this happening, as if I guess he knew better.
Prepared to see it happening?
But it's not as if he said anything last week that made it seem that he knew more than we did, than the administration did, I should say.
And the administration. The thing that caught my eye was McCain usually comes out with, in 2008 we're all Georgians now, when Russia invaded Georgia.
That's correct.
And I think he came out again with we're all Ukrainians now or whatever. John McCain tends to shoot from the hip 9 times out of 10. What sort of bothered me as a journalist who specialized in international relations, running the ABC foreign desk
Sure.
back in the day. Grounded in geopolitics from my military days, studying a lot of history and international relations because I at one point thought I might go into the diplomatic corps.
Okay.
When I quit my military career, I transitioned. I've always tried to get a sense of what happens when these kinds of crises arise. And normally, within the context of the country being put in a sort of tenuous position, you tend to raise the flag and rally around the home troops 9 times out of 10.
Right.
And when I kept hearing this bit about, oh, well, we've got this very, very waffling and very weak president, and because of this weakness, that's the direct cause of this invasion, I was, not surprised, but sort of taken aback.
I was taken aback like you,
Yeah.
but not surprised, depending on where this was coming from.
Right.
Now, if you tune to Fox, you're not surprised.
That's true.
And so,
but I'm talking elected officials
and we're
now.
talking journalism anyway.
Yeah.
So we generally don't talk Fox any.
Right, because that's fake news. but
Right.
But now, so let's take a step back. That's not even because
Right.
the Washington Post also ran a story that I didn't get a chance to read, but I read some critiques on the story that said, well, why is the Washington Post actually calling on the president to bomb Russia? I said, gee, that's some strong words, bomb Russia.
Right.
So I don't want to say the Washington Post said that, folk, because I didn't read the article.
Exactly.
But the critique seemed to imply that that was the thrust of the article. And so I'm saying to myself, all right, so in 2008, when the Georgia situation rose,
Okay.
there wasn't that was the I'm from the Wild West, I shoot first and carry a big stick president that was in office, George W. Bush, right?
Right.
2008, Putin goes into Georgia. What did the Wild West president do?
Go ahead. I'm mid-cough.
Yeah, I don't recall any bombing of Russia. I don't recall any big stick. I don't recall anybody in the political sphere talking about a weak, feckless president who should have been able to prevent this.
Right.
So I'm now at a loss.
I didn't see the saber rattling.
I'm really at a loss to see where all this is coming from.
But
is it because it's this same weak, feckless guy by the name of Barack Obama who actually said, well, we really have one guy we need to go after who really took down our own and went after it.
Right. And
this is the same guy who keeps sending drones and killing people who I really do not like him for, and we really need some accountability about that.
Right.
But I guess he's still that same weak guy, right? Okay.
It's suggested to what the pundits need at the moment. I mean, have you read that the Ukraine situation is even being used as a reason to support the gas pipeline? I mean, that's how far afield they've taken the criticism.
That's Bill O'Reilly. Bill O'Reilly. I don't understand Bill O'Reilly's sense logic or we must get the Keystone Pipeline through now because guess what? Russia's in a war mode.
Right.
We need energy so we can supply the Europeans because Russia might cut off energy from the Europeans.
Right.
Maybe that tar sands pipeline oil may or may not get to the Europeans.
Right.
I think they send the pipeline down for the United States.
The distribution I would get it there is, what, a decade off? So
I have no idea what he's talking about.
I didn't get that at all.
What was the other reason for what was the other foreign policy or other move that we had to immediately push through besides the Keystone Pipeline? He had another big one that's been sitting on the back burner. But
okay,
escapes me because it was just so ludicrous that my brain wouldn't compute. But here's let me take a step back because
little historical perspective.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this is the reason why I kick myself for not looking at it from that perspective when we talked about it for the last show is the interesting thing about empires, and you have to understand the Soviet Union basically is an outgrowth of the Russian Empire. There was a Russian Empire within the 18th, 19th, 19th, 20th century, and under that empire, you basically had Crimea and Ukraine and all those folks that are in that Soviet Union. When that empire broke up and there was a little bit of independence, guess what? When the Soviet Union got reformed, all those people fell right back into the Soviet Empire.
The old historical alliances sort of congealed again.
Right. The interesting thing about empires like that is they always try to make sure that the border states on their borders are either vassals and very weak and pay tribute to them, or they just gobble them up to become part of their empire.
There has to be some use to those neighboring nations.
And they always feel that that's their buffer zone. China does the same thing. The Chinese empire, even before the Mongols took over and spread it all across Asia and parts of Europe, they made sure they had vassal states. They made sure those surrounding states, whether it was North Vietnamese, North Korea, Tibet. You remember when China went into Tibet recently? That was to make sure another vassal state did not break away. Nobody in the West said, oh, you can't do that. China just took Tibet.
No,
there was no saber rattling.
Right. So there was limited economic impact, and that says a lot about what happens.
Yeah. So what happens when all of a sudden Ukraine says, we're tired of the Soviets, we're tired of the Russians, we like you guys in the West. So they start to say, we want to be aligned with NATO, and we want to be aligned with the European Union. Guess what? The old powers that be and the old empire stuff, they begin to feel threatened. They go, oh, wait. If we allow that to happen, then this other piece will go away, and that other piece will go away.
They can see the dominoes falling.
Yeah, I should have really spotted that.
But
and it should have raised a red flag when they were starting to talk about, let's take $2 billion or $3 billion from Europe and align ourselves with the EU and become a part of NATO. The Russians are not ever going to want to let that happen.
They're not going to let that happen that easily. No.
I don't care who's in the White House. I don't care what the European, and you notice the Europeans aren't doing much saber rattling on this thing. And that's because the Europeans understand that's how that those geopolitical decisions.
They don't have money to send or troops to send there.
And they don't plan to. And they understand that Crimea used to be part of Russia. The Crimeans call themselves Russian. So they're not really pushing to say, we're going to go to war with you for taking over the Crimea, because the Russians think they're just taking back the Crimea. The Crimeans are happy that the Russians are taking them back. And the Ukrainians, they go, well, look, they're not really a part of us, but they are a part of us. We would like to keep our territorial integrity.
And that's exactly right. The territorial integrity is what makes this a complex one, because the west side of the nation is nothing like the eastern end and the Crimean Peninsula. It's really like two different nations, but they will not split. They don't want to do that.
They don't want to split.
And to settle this, the folks on the west side who rose up when the president refused to sign the alliance agreement with the European Union. I mean, once that happened and they realized it wasn't going to happen, they took issues into their hands.
They went into the streets.
And as we said last week, there's no real central leader there yet. So they're still getting their act together. We have that heavyweight champion, but he's in no way
he's not
a leader.
Just the guy,
No. And the Crimean Peninsula, that's as you said, historically, they view themselves as Russian, and they view the rest of the nation as the rest of the nation, not part of what they want to do. So this might have to. Well, we'll see how
it's gonna.
But the right wing. Well, you should have seen this coming. What are you going to do about it? That's the part of it that continues to astonish me.
Actually, everybody in the West should have seen this coming, including the people like Lindsey Graham and John McCain and Rudolph Giuliani and all these folks, including Barack Obama and John Kerry. If they understand historical geopolitics, they all should have seen that coming because of that historical relationship between Russia and the Crimea, and between former empires who like to keep their borders and their vassal states as vassal states. Yeah, a lot of people should have seen this coming, not just Barack Obama. None of them saw it coming.
But do you think they were blinded by the fact that here again, it's economically insignificant? So the concern wasn't there that this would create a rumble in the stock market, for example. Is that part of it? The fact that the economic impact isn't.
I'm not sure, because there's some complex things about the fact that Ukraine is where that Russian pipeline.
Oh, that port is devilishly important.
Yes, see my point?
Okay.
And so knowing that that's an economic thing with Russia,
right,
you need to understand that that's why Russia is not going to be happy that you're trying to pull the Ukraine away. The interesting thing is,
good point.
The Russians provide Europe, and especially Germany, a whole bunch of their energy. And so that's the other reason why sanctions and waving economic big sticks are not really going to be as effective as the current administration would like.
Sure.
But guess what? Nobody in this elected government, whether it's John McCain, Lindsey Graham, or Barack Obama, the president, wants to put any boot on the ground or drop any bomb anywhere, because the people in this country don't see any of that as being a part of the national interest in this country.
Right.
That's why they didn't want to put any troops in Syria. That's why I don't care what humanitarian causes, how many people are dying in Syria. Nobody's going in there with bombs or troops, because they're tired of Afghanistan. They're tired of the bogus Iraq war. They're tired of U.S. being the policeman of the globe over and over. And guess what? President Barack Obama understands that full well. That's why he's not standing up there saying, I'm going to war with you, because he knows the American people are not going to sign a check to send him to war. And guess what? Even if he said, I'm going to war with you, those chicken-livered folk in the Congress, in both houses, they wouldn't be signing that check anyway.
No, we wouldn't have the votes or the check to sign.
Think about it.
Trillions of dollars.
The places they go to war with are Panama, Grenada. Think back, folk. Anytime they decide they're going to rattle this big stick that they claim they have, they pick on places like Grenada, which has no standing army, and Panama, which is a vassal state. So tell me, who was in office when they went into Panama?
Sure.
George H.W. Bush. Who was in office when they went into Grenada? Another one of the Bushes?
I believe so, yes.
So
those were rather easy.
Look, but on the flip side of that coin, though, and I really, we shouldn't spend the entire show on this, but hey, it's a significant topic.
We have about 10. We still have 10 minutes left.
It's a significant topic.
We're in good shape.
The flip side of that, though, is for me, as looking at that same global perspective and that historical background stuff, if you think about the number of examples that this country has set, Grenada, Panama, Iraq.
Right.
We went into all of those places. Grenada was humanitarian grounds. Panama was protecting our self-interest and, quote, humanitarian grounds. Iraq was humanitarian grounds for the world, because we were looking for weapons of mass destruction.
Absolutely. We were protecting the entire region.
Those are three examples. And then the final one that we dragged a bunch of other folks along with was Libya. We went into Libya on humanitarian grounds. So if you look at that scenario and listen to that, when I saw Putin sit down in this chair for that news conference and say, oh, we had to go in to protect our Russian citizens in Crimea, I almost fell out the chair laughing. I'm going, this guy has just taken a page out of the United States playbook and just said, so call me on it. You guys just did this 4 times in the last umpteen years, and now you're going to try to browbeat me for using the same canard to protect my what I perceive as my self-interest.
No.
Now, unfortunately, Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian sovereignty is suffering because he's doing that.
Right.
And the forum that should be taking care of that, you and I both know, is the United Nations.
Right.
But who has a seat on the Security Council on the United Nations?
Oh, of course, yes. A permanent
Russia.
seat, of course.
A permanent seat.
Right.
So any move you could try to make to push them back by way of international coming together
Gets a veto,
you
or
can't.
whatever
Gets
that,
a veto.
or whatever that vote
Gets a
is
veto
within
from
the council.
from the Russians. So
Yes.
that's basically our historical current analysis of what's going on and the backdrop for why some of it's happened and why we probably won't see any saber rattling to push the Russians back. Now, they might try to twist their arms with whatever economic pressure they can come
They
up
might
with.
try to push them out of the G8 and the WTO.
And it may or may not work.
Right.
Because I don't think Putin made the last G8 meeting anyway. He just sent one of his guys. Says, "Oh yeah, I'm too busy." So he may not hold G8 as anything big. But they may have some economic leverages that they can pull that you and I probably aren't privy to, or the general public is not privy to. Because there are things that those G8 meetings and international monetary funds and currency stuff that are interconnected, sometimes there's leverage there that most of us don't know about that with luck might help. The thing currently seems to be ratcheting down as we speak, but as you're saying, if the Crimean populace is chasing the US envoy out, it may be heating back up again for all we know.
And some journalists were threatened too within the last couple of days. So, and there again, I'm not saying it's local people. We don't know who those folks were who did the cursing and the swearing and the pushing
and
of the journalists.
But that's a good segue for us.
Yes.
When they start threatening journalists, you know there's something shaky going on, which segues us to Venezuela.
Okay.
And we did talk about Venezuela in the last show. I believe the update that I got, because I went up to Richard Prince's journalism just to get a quick overview on what he had aggregated from the various news sources. So,
and for those of you who don't view that online, it's journal-ISMS, journalism. Just Google that, and you'll find very good collection of the recent news. Richard Prince does it every week.
Great stuff.
As you look it up, and we have about 5.5 minutes left.
So one of the headlines, Venezuela releases journalists as others urge attention. And basically, I believe it was an Italian female journalist that had been thrown into jail by the government forces during the street riots that were taking place in Caracas. And the interesting thing is Francesco Commissari, that's her name, and she was released on this past Sunday, which would be a week ago from the Monday we're airing. And so the interesting thing is the President Maduro's forces have been for a long time cracking down on journalists.
Right.
And as the street uprisings came about, they started even cracking down even more.
Right. The orange flag turned red, bright red, as he starts jailing people.
Right. But the Hispanic journalists here in this country have been covering that story a heck of a lot more than our mainstream media.
Right.
And what they're saying is, listen, folk, you all need to start paying attention to what's going on in Venezuela, because that's as big a story as what's going on in Ukraine, even though it's not an invasion of someone else's sovereign territory.
It's a major political shift because they're evolving from the old Chavez administration, which held
great popular
popular support for decades, and now
we've got a president who has no real popular support, and so he's using force. And as let me quote one, I think it's Ruben Navarrete, who writes for the Washington Post group. He says Maduro is using armed soldiers and plainclothes goons on motorcycles to beat and kill people in order to stifle dissent and keep power. Quote, flat out criminal. So that's Ruben Navarrete in one of his columns.
And I've been checking. I'm not sure if they've been tweaking down the social media outlets or tweaking down access to them. I don't want to get into it. Russia is doing a little to throttle access to certain social media sites, so people in Russia
can't hear what's going on in Crimea and Ukraine.
Right. Yeah. At least not the pro European Union side. They've throttled down access to those social media outlets in Russia. The people in Crimea can still see it, but go ahead. I haven't read to see if the Maduro administration has made any attempt to do that.
Well, the International Press Institute has been urging Venezuela's government to end media pressure. So evidently, he has been putting big pressure on all forms of media while he's trying to maintain control. So Venezuela, as we said in the last show, is something we will continue to bring to your attention because we think it needs to be brought to your attention, folks. And in the last minute, what do we got, 2 minutes left?
We have about 2 minutes, yes.
Quick segue from breaking stuff to recap Oscars.
Oscars
we covered a lot of stuff on leading up to the Oscars, so we can do a quick summary. The interesting thing were the fact that the first director of Latin descent, Alfonso Cuarón, yes, I believe it's the director of Gravity.
Yes.
Alfonso Cuarón, I believe the pronunciation is. He got Best Director. They got like seven.
Right.
Seven Oscars.
Yes. Oh, yes.
And he got one for editing. He got one for directing. The film got one for sound and sound mixing.
Right. In pool, they would call it running the table, but go ahead.
Yeah, it was pretty close.
Yes.
It was close. They had a lot of nominations. They got 7 of the, I guess, 10 that they got, 10 or 11. 12 Years a Slave had something like 9 and managed to get 3, which was interesting because they got Best Supporting Actress, they got Best Picture, which I guess is the top prize.
Yes.
And Lupita Nyong'o got Best Supporting Actress. And so, but the interesting thing was there were all kinds of weird coverage of the results of the Oscar.
And we only have 45 seconds. What did the headline say? They kept using the word...
There were some crazy headlines by some California player about slaves become master.
Yes, or 12 Years a Slave escapes with the big prize.
Escapes with big prize.
Look on Richard Prince's journalisms for a
seriously crazy
of
stuff.
that.
And I believe Chelsea, handler of Chelsea, lately stuck her foot in her mouth with all kinds of what I call juvenile stupid tweets. But which people could actually consider racist tweets, and I won't repeat them here.
So we have about 10 seconds.
But hey, look, we've done our quick recap. Maybe we'll go into it some more. Media Watch, Eric Tait,
Bob Anthony.
And we'll catch you the next time.